Welcome to Echoes of Fear, a place where chilling tales come to life. Today, we dive into a terrifying and mysterious story that explores the darkness of the unknown. Get ready for a ride through a deserted road, the silence of a forgotten highway, and the eerie disappearance of a lone driver. This is a tale that will haunt you long after the video ends. It was the dead of night when Rachel Turner found herself driving alone on a desolate stretch of highway. Hollow Road, as the locals called it, had earned its name from the vast emptiness that surrounded it. No streetlights, no signs of life, just endless stretches of dark, untouched land. Rachel had been traveling for hours, and as her headlights cut through the inky blackness, the world outside seemed to disappear. She had heard the rumors about Hollow Road, stories whispered in hushed tones at gas stations, in local diners, and over campfires. People said that once you drove too far down the road, the world seemed to change. There were tales of drivers who had ventured out there, never to be seen again. Those who survived often spoke of eerie shadows and strange sounds that echoed in the distance. But Rachel, ever the skeptic, dismissed these stories as nothing more than small-town folklore. That night, her car's tires hummed against the cracked asphalt as she drove, the only sound in the vast emptiness. Her eyes began to tire, and she found herself drifting in and out of a foggy trance. That's when she saw it, a flicker of movement on the side of the road. Her heart raced as she quickly glanced at her rearview mirror. Nothing. The road was still empty, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the air. She couldn't shake it, and it made her uneasy. She sped up, trying to shake the chill that had settled deep in her bones. Minutes later, her car sputtered, and the engine began to sputter erratically. Panic surged as Rachel tried to restart the engine, but it failed. The car had stalled in the middle of nowhere. With her phone dead and no help in sight, Rachel stepped out of the car to assess the situation. The wind howled, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow across the road. As she walked to the front of the car, a shadow flickered in the corner of her eye. She froze, staring into the darkness. The air seemed to grow colder, heavier. It wasn't long before Rachel realized that she wasn't alone, and in that moment, her life would change forever. Rachel stood frozen, feeling the cold air that seemed to swallow the road ahead of her. The silence was oppressive, as if the entire world had stopped existing, except for her and that strange presence. She looked around, but there was nothing but the infinite darkness and the faint light of the moon. Then the sound began. At first, it was a distant rustling, like the wind whispering through the trees. But Rachel soon realized it wasn't just the wind. There was something else. The rustling turned into footsteps, soft but distinct, like someone was walking in the distance trying to approach without making noise. Fear gripped her chest. She looked at the car, as if the safety of the vehicle could somehow push away the growing sense of danger. But the distance seemed too far, and the car was now just a weak point in the vastness of the night. She didn't know whether to wait for help or try to get the car going again to leave. The sound of the footsteps was getting closer and closer, as though that presence was moving toward her. Rachel took a step back, her eyes now frantically scanning for any sign of life. Nothing. But the footsteps were growing louder, dragging, almost as if whoever was approaching had difficulty walking. She couldn't identify the direction, but she felt a growing pressure on her shoulders, as if the very air was being compressed by an invisible force. Then she saw it. A figure appeared to her left, emerging from the shadows. It was a human silhouette, but its body seemed distorted, as if the proportions were wrong. The shoulders were too broad, and the legs long and awkward. The figure moved slowly, and its feet didn't touch the ground the way they should. Instead, they seemed to glide over the asphalt with unsettling smoothness. Rachel couldn't move, paralyzed by fear. Her throat went dry, and she tried to scream, but no words came out. The figure drew closer, moving without haste, But inevitably, "Who are you?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. The figure stopped for a moment, and Rachel felt an overwhelming presence inside her. Something was wrong, and she knew that this thing was not human. Then, with a sudden movement, the figure lifted its head and looked directly at her. The eyes. They were the blackest eyes she had ever seen, as if there was nothing inside them. No pupils, no whites, just an endless abyss. And before Rachel could take a step back, the figure reached out a hand, which seemed to stretch unnaturally. She tried to retreat, but the air felt dense, as if it had been compressed by an invisible force. When the hand was almost upon her, a harsh metallic sound cut through the air. Suddenly, the figure vanished, as if it had melted into the darkness. The fear still gripped Rachel, but she knew she had to act. She couldn't stay there any longer. Her survival instincts screamed at her to run back to the car, but her legs felt heavy, as if the road itself was trying to pull her down. With tremendous effort, she began to run. The car was an unbearably long distance away. With every step, the dragging footsteps returned, louder, closer. The feeling that something was at her shadow was overwhelming. She looked over her shoulder, but there was nothing there. The presence was invisible, but unmistakable. Finally, Rachel reached the car. With trembling hands, she tried to open the door, but it was locked. She was alone, in the middle of the night, with whatever that presence was still watching her. With a quick motion, she grabbed the key and unlocked the door, quickly getting into the car. When she started the engine, the car hesitated. The tension was unbearable, but finally, the engine roared to life. Rachel didn't look back, but deep down, she knew that something was watching her from the darkness, something that would never leave her in peace. She put the car in gear, the tires screeching on the empty road. But as the road stretched out in front of her, she felt that something had changed, not just on the road, but within herself. Something had marked her. Now I'm going to narrate to you her words after all this. I don't know how long I drove after I got back into that car. Minutes, hours. It all seemed like a blur, but I couldn't look back. Every time I thought about it, every time I even considered the possibility of turning my head to see if something had followed me, my heart would race, and I pushed the thought away as quickly as possible. I wasn't safe yet. I needed to keep going, keep driving. The road stretched endlessly, the dark sky above me heavy with unspoken threats. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that it was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, watching me, waiting. But the car kept running, and I kept driving, my hands firmly gripping the steering wheel, my eyes wide open, scanning the road ahead. I don't know how long it was before I saw the first signs of civilization. Now let's move on to the next story, if you can still handle it. I'll tell it from the perspective of the person who lived the story. We have this account, and I need you to close your eyes and imagine that we're standing face to face. Hey folks, I don't know if you'll believe me, but what happened that night is something I'll never forget. It was just another regular shift for me, driving down one of those empty, desolate highways. You know the kind, the ones nobody talks about. But this one was different. I'm a truck driver. I've been doing this for years. I've seen it all, or at least I thought I had. That night, I was on an old stretch of road, one that hadn't seen traffic in decades. The signs were faded, the asphalt cracked and crumbling under my wheels. They call it Route 82, but to me, it felt like a forgotten path, abandoned by time. There wasn't a single car in sight. It was around 2 a.m. No lights for miles, no sound except the hum of my engine. Just me, my truck, and the darkness. I had been driving for hours, and honestly, I was starting to feel the isolation. You get a certain feeling when you're on those old roads, like someone's watching you, but you can't see them. It gets under your skin. I didn't think much of it at first. I've been through worse. But then, I saw it. A figure, in the distance, standing by the side of the road, just watching me. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, maybe someone trying to catch a ride. But there was something wrong about it, something unnatural. It didn't move, not at all, just stood there, motionless, like a statue. I didn't want to stop. My gut told me something was off. But there's a code we truck drivers follow. You don't leave anyone stranded. So I slowed down, cracked the window, and shouted, "Need a ride?" No response, not a sound. The figure just stared at me. I was about to drive off, maybe just call it in when I got to the next town, but then there was a loud knock on my truck, like something slamming against the side of it. I jerked the wheel and slammed on the brakes, heart racing, but when I looked out, nothing. The figure was gone. I sat there for a moment, wondering if I was just seeing things, but then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, like someone was walking right next to my truck. But when I looked out the window, there was no one there. I knew right then something was wrong. I tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. Dead silence. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no help, no signal, and no way out. That's when I saw it again. The figure. But this time, it was closer, much closer, standing right at the edge of my truck, just out of the corner of my eye. I could feel its presence. It wasn't human. It was wrong. Its eyes, if you could even call them eyes, were just black holes, sucking in all the light. And then, the voice. It said my name, softly at first, then louder. "You shouldn't have stopped." That's when I lost it. I slammed the gas pedal, not even caring where I was going anymore, just praying to get away. The truck roared to life and I sped down that road like a maniac. I didn't look back. But when I got to the next town, I stopped at a diner to get some coffee. My hands were still shaking and I tried to make sense of everything that had happened. But when I walked in, the waitress gave me a strange look. She asked, "You all right, hun? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't know how to answer her, but I was about to leave when I saw something that made my blood run cold. The man in the booth across from me. He had the same eyes as the figure on the road. Now, I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm just telling you what happened. That night, I left that diner and never looked back. But every time I drive that road, every time, it feels like something's waiting for me, watching me, and I don't know if it's ever going to stop. So take my advice, folks. If you're ever driving down an empty road at night and you see someone standing by the side, don't stop. No matter what, stay alert. You never know what's lurking in the shadows. Stay alert. To finish the last story, but not the least unsettling one, I thank you all for your company. This text will again have the narrator's perspective. It was late, way later than I had planned. I had been driving for hours, heading to a small town about 100 miles from where I was. The road was narrow, winding, and isolated. There were no other cars, no signs of civilization, just the endless stretch of asphalt ahead of me. I'd taken the wrong exit by accident, and now I was stuck on some old highway. I couldn't even remember the last time I saw a sign, or any kind of marker to tell me where I was. The gas light in my car blinked on about 30 miles back, but I kept hoping I'd find something, anything, before I ran out of fuel. The night was dark, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustling of the wind outside. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A flicker of light in the distance. A gas station. Or at least, what looked like one. It wasn't much, just a small old station with peeling paint and a single light flickering above the entrance. At that point, I didn't care what it looked like. I just needed gas. I pulled in, and as I got out of the car, I noticed how quiet it was. There wasn't a single sound. No crickets, no distant hum of traffic, just silence. The place looked abandoned at first, but as I walked closer to the building, I saw two figures standing near the pumps. They didn't seem to notice me at first, but I could feel their eyes on me. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I walked to the pump, but the man standing by it finally spoke. "You look lost," he said, his voice deep, almost unnervingly calm. I froze for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I think I took a wrong turn somewhere." The man didn't respond right away. He just stared at me with his strange, unblinking eyes. I started to feel uncomfortable under his gaze. "Are you sure you want to get gas here?" the woman next to him asked, her voice sounding oddly rehearsed. "It's not really safe around here at night." I laughed nervously, but the smile on my face felt stiff. "I don't have much of a choice." "Are you sure?" she repeated, and now there was a hint of something darker in her tone. "It's better to stay on the main road. You could end up in worse places out here." I wasn't sure if I was hearing things or if they were just trying to scare me, but there was something about their tone, their almost rehearsed concern, that made me want to leave. But I needed gas, and my car wouldn't make it another 20 miles without it. "I'll be fine," I said, trying to sound confident. The man finally moved and started pumping gas for me without asking. As he did, I noticed that he was wearing a very old, faded uniform, the kind you wouldn't see anywhere today. He didn't speak again, and neither did the woman. The whole place felt off. The interior of the building was dark, the lights flickering in a way that didn't feel normal. I could see through the dirty windows that there were strange old newspapers taped up on the walls, as if the place hadn't been cleaned or updated in years. The air smelled stale, almost musty. I glanced back at the pump. The gas was filling up slowly, too slowly. The man was still standing there, not even looking at me anymore, just staring at the ground. The woman spoke again. "You know, there's a shortcut that could save you some time, but it's not for everyone. Only people who understand it." I felt a chill run down my spine, and suddenly, all I wanted to do was leave. I reached into my pocket for my wallet, but before I could even pull it out, the man stepped forward and spoke in a low voice. "You're not from around here, are you?" I didn't answer. My gut was telling me something wasn't right. The woman smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "You should leave now. It's not too late." I wasn't sure if they were trying to threaten me or just warn me, but either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I quickly grabbed the pump handle, shut off the gas, and threw the nozzle back in place. "Thanks, but I'll be going now," I said, my voice shaky. As I started to walk back to my car, I noticed the woman looking at me again, but this time, her eyes seemed almost vacant. She was staring at me as if she knew something I didn't. I quickly got into my car, slammed the door, and drove away without looking back. As I sped down the road, my heart was racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just escaped something I couldn't even begin to understand. The silence was oppressive, and my headlights cut through the dark, but I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something, or someone, following me. But nothing. No one. It wasn't until I reached the next town, miles away, that I pulled over and took a breath. My hands were still shaking, and I didn't want to stop anywhere, not even for gas, for the rest of the night. The whole experience had felt wrong, like I had walked into a trap. I'll never forget that gas station, or the strange people who were there. I don't know what they wanted, but I do know this. I'll never take that road again. And if you're ever driving down some forgotten highway late at night and you see an old, isolated gas station with no cars around, just think twice before you stop. You never know what kind of people might be waiting for you. And so, we come to the end of another story here on Echoes of Fear. If you've felt a chill run down your spine and can't stop thinking about the shadows, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming tales. And if you have a terrifying story to share, something that happened to you, or a local legend that still sends shivers down your spine, send it to us. Who knows, your story could be the next one to be told here in one of our videos. Send your tale to the email listed in the description below and get ready to make others tremble with fear. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next Echoes of Fear. Stay alert. The shadows may be closer than you think.